What if I told you the greatest mind of the 20th century almost didn't make it? Before the iconic equations and the Nobel Prize, Albert Einstein faced years of rejection, doubt, and obscurity. This isn't the story of a genius. It's the untold tale of the formative struggles that sculpted the man who would change our understanding of the universe forever. We know Einstein as the wild-haired sage, the face on posters and T-shirts, the name we invoke when someone solves a difficult problem. But that Einstein, the legend, the icon, emerged from a version of himself most people never see. A young man walking the streets of Zurich with unpaid bills in his pocket and no prospects on the horizon. A university graduate whose professors wouldn't recommend him for jobs, a patent clerk buried in paperwork, wondering if he'd wasted his talents. So how does a student who annoyed his teachers and failed job interviews become the person whose name we now use as shorthand for genius itself? The answer isn't in the moments of breakthrough. It's in the years of obscurity that came before them. The forgotten years. The lost chapter between promise and fame that almost nobody talks about, and what happened in those years changes everything we think we know about talent, timing, and what it really takes to transform the world. March 14th, 1879. A baby is born in Ulm, a city in the Kingdom of Württemberg, now part of southern Germany. There's nothing remarkable about the event. The family is middle class, Jewish but secular, ordinary in almost every measure. The father, Hermann, runs a small electrochemical business. The mother, Pauline, is educated and musical but unremarkable by the standards of her time. The baby is named Albert, and for the first few years of his life he seems, if anything, worryingly slow. He doesn't speak until he's past 2 years old. Family members whisper concerns. But when he finally does begin talking, he speaks in complete, carefully formed sentences, as if he'd been rehearsing them silently for months. At age 5, something happens that will later become legend. His father shows him a pocket compass. The boy stares at it, transfixed. The needle always points north, no matter how you turn the case. Why? What invisible force commands it? The question lodges in his mind and never fully leaves. Decades later, Einstein will describe this moment as his first encounter with the deep hidden order beneath surface appearances. But childhood wonder doesn't translate smoothly into classroom success. Not in 1880s Germany. The schools young Albert attends are products of the Prussian system, rigid, hierarchical, built on memorization and obedience. Students stand when the teacher enters. They recite facts in unison. Independent questions are discouraged. Creativity is seen as disruptive. And Albert Einstein, even as a child, chafes against every aspect of this structure. He's not a bad student in the traditional sense. His grades in mathematics and science are strong. But his teachers sense something off. He doesn't show the proper deference. He asks why too often. He seems bored by rote tasks, distracted during drills, physically uncomfortable when forced to conform. One teacher will later tell him he'll never amount to anything. Another suggests he'd be better off leaving school entirely. The family moves to Munich, then to Italy as Hermann's business falters. Albert stays behind to finish his studies, living with distant relatives, increasingly isolated and miserable. At 15, he drops out, just quits, walks away from the German gymnasium system and reunites with his family in Italy, unsure what comes next. This is the first major rupture in his life. Not a triumphant rebellion, just a kid who couldn't stand school anymore. But beneath the surface, something is building. He's reading, deeply. Books on geometry, algebra, physics. Not because anyone assigns them, but because they fascinate him. He's thinking about light, about motion, about the strange implications of Maxwell's electromagnetic theory. He's imagining what it would be like to ride alongside a beam of light, traveling at light speed. Would the wave appear frozen, motionless? The question makes no sense in classical physics, but he can't stop turning it over in his mind. So if he hated school this much, how did he end up at one of the best technical universities in Europe? In 1895, Einstein takes the entrance exam for the Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich, known today as ETH Zurich, one of the premier science and engineering institutions in the world. He's 16, younger than most applicants, and he doesn't have a secondary school diploma. He fails, not catastrophically. His scores in mathematics and physics are exceptional, but his marks in languages, biology, and other subjects fall short. The admissions office suggests he finish his secondary education first, then reapply. Einstein enrolls in a cantonal school in Aarau, Switzerland. It's a revelation. The Swiss system is less authoritarian, more open to independent thought. Teachers encourage questions. Students are treated as individuals. For the first time, Einstein feels like he can breathe in a classroom. He graduates in 1896 and applies again to the Polytechnic. This time, he's admitted. Zurich feels like freedom. The city is cosmopolitan, intellectually vibrant, full of students from across Europe. Einstein throws himself into physics and mathematics, auditing lectures, reading original papers by Maxwell, Helmholtz, Boltzmann. He's finally in the environment he's dreamed of. But the old tensions resurface almost immediately. Einstein doesn't attend lectures regularly. He finds most of them dull, rehashes of textbook material. Instead, he studies independently, working through advanced texts on his own schedule, following his curiosity rather than the curriculum. He skips laboratory sessions. He argues with professors, particularly Heinrich Weber, who teaches courses in experimental physics. Weber emphasizes hands-on technique and incremental research. Einstein wants to focus on theory, on the big conceptual questions. The two clash repeatedly. Other students notice Einstein is brilliant, everyone can see that, but he's also arrogant, socially awkward, dismissive of work that doesn't interest him. He forms a small circle of friends, Marcel Grossmann, a gifted mathematician who takes meticulous lecture notes that Einstein borrows, Mileva Maric, one of the few women in the program, who becomes his romantic partner and intellectual companion. But outside that circle, Einstein is isolated. He doesn't network. He doesn't cultivate relationships with his professors. He doesn't play the academic game. In 1900, he graduates. His final ranking, 4th out of 5 students in his section. Grossmann, who attended every lecture and stayed on good terms with the faculty, finishes first. Einstein, despite his obvious talent, has burned too many bridges. And now, the real test begins. What happens when a controversial student, someone who annoyed his teachers and skipped half his classes, tries to find work in the brutally competitive world of academic physics? Before we continue, if this is the only time we ever get to unpack Einstein's forgotten years together, make sure you're subscribed so you can find your way back. This might be the last deep dive we take into the hidden struggles behind genius. The summer of 1900. Einstein is 21 years old, freshly graduated, and unemployed. In the world of early 20th century European academia, the path is clear. You finish your studies, and your professors recommend you for an assistantship, a low-paying position where you teach, assist with research, and work toward a doctoral degree. It's grueling, but it's the entry point. Almost every successful physicist of the era follows this route. Einstein applies, and applies, and applies. He writes to universities across Europe, Germany, Italy, Austria, the Netherlands. He offers to work for free, just for the opportunity to be part of a research lab. He highlights his mathematical skills, his independent work, his passion for theoretical physics. Every application is rejected. Some replies are polite. Others don't bother responding at all. The most painful rejection comes from his own professors at Zurich. Heinrich Weber, the man Einstein clashed with most frequently, not only refuses to hire him, but declines to write letters of recommendation. Without Weber's support, doors that might have opened remain closed. Einstein takes temporary work. He tutors high school students in mathematics, He accepts a short-term substitute teaching position at a technical school in Inventor, then another in Schaffhausen. The work is inconsistent, poorly paid, and deeply frustrating. He's overqualified and underemployed, teaching basic algebra to teenagers while his former classmates secure stable academic posts. The financial strain is crushing. Einstein borrows money from friends, including Marcel Grossmann. His relationship with Mileva grows complicated. She's pregnant, a fact that brings both joy and terror given his lack of stable income. In January 1902, their daughter Liesl is born. The circumstances are murky. Mileva returns to her family in Serbia for the birth, and Liesl disappears from the historical record shortly after, likely given up for adoption or lost to illness. Einstein never speaks publicly about her. His letters from this period, particularly those to Grossmann, reveal a young man teetering on the edge. He's intellectually confident. He knows he has ideas worth pursuing, but professionally adrift, he jokes bitterly about the academic world, calling it a collection of mediocrities who reward conformity over insight. But beneath the jokes, there's real pain, self-doubt, the creeping fear that maybe he missed his chance. Most Einstein biographers accept that this period, roughly 1900 to 1902, was the lowest point in his early life. Although arguments continue over how bitter he really felt in those years, some historians emphasize his resilience, his ability to keep working on physics problems despite the rejection. Others point to the emotional toll visible in his correspondence, the sense of a man watching his dreams slip away. And then, in the spring of 1902, something shifts. Marcel Grossmann's father, who has connections in the Swiss government, mentions Einstein's situation to an acquaintance. The Swiss Patent Office in Bern is hiring. They need a technical expert to evaluate patent applications for new inventions, electromagnetic devices, mechanical instruments, precision tools. The work doesn't require a PhD. It requires someone who can read technical schematics, understand physical principles, and assess whether an invention is truly novel or just a repackaging of existing ideas. It's not a professorship, it's not research, it's a desk job in a bureaucracy. But it's stable. It pays 3,500 Swiss francs a year, modest but survivable. And Einstein, after 2 years of rejection and desperation, accepts. How does someone nobody wants to hire end up with the mental space to revolutionize physics? The answer is stranger than you'd expect. June 23, 1902. Albert Einstein begins work at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern. His title, Technical Expert, 3rd Class. His office, a small room he shares with other examiners. His job, review patent applications, determine whether they meet legal standards for novelty and utility, write technical reports. 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. It's repetitive, bureaucratic, and far removed from the world of cutting-edge physics research. On the surface, it looks like defeat, a brilliant theoretical mind consigned to paperwork. But Einstein will later call the patent office his secular monastery, and he means it as a compliment. Here's what most people miss about those years in Bern. The work isn't intellectually empty. Patent evaluation requires a very specific skill, stripping away the language, the marketing, the superficial details of an invention, and identifying the core physical principle at work. Does this device actually do what it claims? Is the mechanism sound? What assumptions is the inventor making about how forces, currents, or materials behave? It's training in conceptual clarity. Every day, Einstein practices distinguishing between real innovations and clever packaging. He learns to see through complexity to the essential idea beneath, and he does this hundreds of times, with electromagnetic devices, clocks, motors, measurement instruments, the very technologies that embody the physics of his era. The job has another advantage. It's not all-consuming. Einstein is efficient. He finishes his daily quota of patent reviews quickly, often in just a few hours. The rest of the time, officially, he's supposed to look busy. Instead, he thinks, he keeps a notebook in his desk drawer. When his supervisor isn't watching, he pulls it out and works on his own problems. Thought experiments, mathematical derivations, questions about the nature of light, the behavior of molecules, the structure of space and time. His colleagues notice but mostly turn a blind eye. As long as the work gets done, nobody cares what he does in his spare moments. In the evenings, Einstein returns to the small apartment he shares with Mileva, whom he marries in January 1903. They have a second child, Hans Albert, born in 1904. The domestic routine is ordinary, almost mundane: dinner, childcare, bills. But late at night, after Mileva and the baby are asleep, Einstein sits at the kitchen table with his notebooks. He's working on multiple problems simultaneously. One involves the nature of light. Maxwell's equations suggest light is a wave, but certain experimental results, like the photoelectric effect, don't fit that picture. What if light comes in discrete packets, quanta, rather than continuous waves? It's a radical idea, one that contradicts decades of established physics, but the mathematics keeps pointing him there. Another problem involves the motion of molecules. How can you prove atoms and molecules really exist, not just as theoretical constructs, but as physical entities? Einstein develops a way to calculate the size and motion of molecules based on observable phenomena like diffusion and viscosity. It's technically elegant, but also deeply practical, the kind of bridge between theory and reality his patent work has trained him to build. And then there's the question that has haunted him since his teenage years. What happens when you try to imagine motion at the speed of light? Classical mechanics, the framework that has dominated physics since Newton, assumes time is absolute, a universal clock ticking the same way for everyone, everywhere. But Maxwell's equations suggest something stranger. The speed of light appears to be constant, regardless of how you're moving. If that's true, then time itself can't be absolute. It has to be relative to the observer. The idea is almost unthinkable. It violates common sense. It overturns centuries of accepted wisdom. But Einstein can't escape the logic. If the speed of light is constant, then time must be flexible. In May 1905, he completes a paper titled "On the Electrodynamics of Moving Bodies." It lays out what will become known as the special theory of relativity. Space and time are not separate, fixed entities. They're intertwined, relative to the observer's motion. Simultaneity, the idea that two events happen at the same moment, is not absolute. It depends on your frame of reference. It's a paper written by a patent clerk, working in stolen moments at a government office in Bern, with no access to a laboratory, no team of researchers, no institutional support, and it will eventually change physics forever. But that's not all. Between March and September 1905, Einstein completes 3 more papers, each one a landmark in its own right. The first, published in March, proposes that light behaves as discrete quanta, photons, and uses this idea to explain the photoelectric effect. This work will eventually earn him the Nobel Prize. The second, submitted in April, is his doctoral dissertation, calculating the size of molecules from observable effects. The third, completed in September, derives the most famous equation in physics: E equals mc squared. Energy and mass are not separate. They're two forms of the same thing, convertible under the right conditions. 4 papers, all groundbreaking, all written in the span of 6 months by a 26-year-old patent examiner who couldn't get a university job 5 years earlier. What finally pushed these ideas into the open in 1905? Historians debate the specifics, but most agree on a few key factors. Einstein had been thinking about these problems for years, since his student days, even since his teenage thought experiments. The patent office gave him time and mental discipline. His conversations with a small group of friends in Bern, a kind of informal study group they jokingly called the Olympia Academy, helped him clarify his ideas, and perhaps most importantly, he'd stopped waiting for permission. He wasn't trying to impress professors or secure an academic position. He was just following the questions wherever they led. The papers are submitted to Annalen der Physik, one of the leading physics journals in Europe. They're published without fanfare. The initial response is silence. A few physicists notice, but most are skeptical or simply don't grasp the implications. Einstein continues working at the patent office. He doesn't become famous overnight recognition. When it comes, will be slow and hard-won. But the breakthrough has happened. And it happened not in spite of the forgotten years, but because of them. Before we step into the legacy of those years, take 1 second to like this video. If we disappear from your feed tomorrow, you'll know you helped keep stories like this alive. We've traveled from a bored schoolboy in Munich to a lonely student in Zurich, from a desperate job seeker writing futile applications to a patent clerk quietly assembling ideas that would crack physics wide open. Now we're about to see what those forgotten years really mean, not just for Einstein, but for how we think about talent, timing, and our own struggles. The story doesn't end in 1905, of course. Gradually, other physicists begin to notice Einstein's work. Max Planck, one of the most respected figures in theoretical physics, reads the relativity paper and recognizes its importance. He corresponds with Einstein, invites him to conferences, amplifies his ideas. In 1908, Einstein is offered a lecturer position at the University of Bern, his first academic post, 8 years after graduating in 1909. He's appointed an associate professor at the University of Zurich. The ascent accelerates from there. By 1915, he completes the general theory of relativity, extending his earlier work to include gravity, showing that massive objects warp the fabric of space-time itself. In 1919, a solar eclipse provides experimental confirmation. Starlight bends as it passes near the sun, exactly as Einstein predicted. Newspapers around the world proclaim him a genius. The white-haired icon begins to emerge. But here's what the standard story leaves out. The Einstein who becomes famous in 1919 was shaped entirely by the years nobody saw. The classroom clashes taught him to trust his own judgment over institutional authority. The job rejections forced him to stop seeking validation from the academic establishment. The patent office gave him time, mental discipline, and a daily practice in stripping away superficiality to find the essential principle underneath. If Einstein had landed a professorship in 1900, he likely would have spent those years teaching introductory courses, assisting senior researchers, working on incremental problems chosen by someone else. He might never have had the freedom or the audacity to question the foundations of physics itself. The forgotten years, the years of obscurity and frustration, created the conditions for the breakthrough. This isn't destiny. It's not a story about how everything happens for a reason, or how struggles are secretly blessings in disguise. The forgotten years were hard. They involved real pain, financial stress, strained relationships, and self-doubt. They could easily have gone differently. Einstein might have given up. He might have drifted into a teaching job at a provincial school and been lost to history. The breakthrough wasn't inevitable, but it was possible. And it became real because Einstein, for whatever combination of stubbornness, curiosity, and desperation, kept working not for recognition, not for a career, just because the questions wouldn't leave him alone. And that changes how we should think about genius, not as a spark that appears fully formed, but as something built slowly, in obscurity, through years of thinking that nobody witnesses or rewards. The patent office years weren't a detour from Einstein's destiny. They were the crucible. So what does this mean for you? If you're in a job that feels like a dead end, if you're facing rejection after rejection, if you feel like you're wasting your talents in a place nobody will ever notice, Einstein's story doesn't tell you everything will work out. It doesn't promise success. But it does offer a different way of thinking about those years. Maybe the work you're doing, even if it's not the work you want, is teaching you something you'll need later. Maybe the time you're spending outside the spotlight is time you need to develop ideas that can't be rushed. Maybe the very fact that you're not performing for an audience is what allows you to take risks, to question assumptions, to follow thoughts that would seem too strange or too bold if you were trying to impress a committee. The forgotten years weren't wasted. They were essential. And maybe, if you're in your own version of the patent office right now, the same is true for you. Before we go, tell us in the comments, have you ever felt stuck in a patent office moment of your own life? What did those years teach you that you couldn't have learned any other way? Einstein's forgotten years remind us that the story we tell about genius is almost always incomplete. We see the breakthrough, the moment of recognition, the triumph. We don't see the years of drift and doubt that made it possible. We don't see the classrooms where he was told he'd never amount to anything, the rejection letters, the cramped apartments, the late nights at the kitchen table. But those years were real. They shaped everything that came after. And if we forget them, we lose not just a chapter of Einstein's life, but a truth about how extraordinary things actually happen, not through destiny or magic, but through persistence, curiosity, and the quiet refusal to stop thinking, even when nobody is watching. The mind before the genius, the years before the legend, the man who almost didn't make it but did. That's the Einstein most people never meet, and that's the story that, in the end, might matter most.